The murder of Emmett Till. While the Montgomery bus boycott demonstrated how nonviolent civil disobedience could help end segregation, the 1955 murder of Emmett Till showed that in parts of the South, African Americans could easily become victims of violence. Till, a 14-year-old Chicago youth visiting relatives in Money, Mississippi, was beaten and shot to death for an improper advance toward a white woman. Till had allegedly whistled at Mrs. Carolyn Bryant, who owned a local general store with her husband Roy. Roy Bryant and his half-brother J.W. Milam sought revenge first by kidnapping Till in the middle of the night from a relative's home. They took him to a neighboring county, beat him savagely, and shot him in the head. The men attached weights to Till's body with barbed wire and dumped him into the Tallahatchie River. Fishermen found Till's disfigured corpse 3 days later. Nationwide publicity, led by Mississippi newspaper editor Hodding Carter, brought much attention to the murder. Photographs of Till's body, published in Jet magazine, showed millions the brutality of the crime. When authorities questioned Bryant and Milam about Till's disappearance, they both acknowledged kidnapping him, but said they had let him go to the same night. Both were charged with murder, tried, and acquitted. The jury took only 67 minutes to find the pair not guilty. In a 1956 story in Look magazine, Bryant and Milam both admitted to a journalist that they killed Till. They claimed that they originally planned to only pistol whip him, but felt compelled to kill him when he showed little fear. The case galvanized African Americans as well as sympathetic whites, providing a rallying point for the early civil rights movement. Also, posted on Homework Now is the link to the Murder of Emmett Till documentary by American Experience and PBS. Southern Christian Leadership Conference. After the success of the Montgomery bus boycott, blacks staged boycotts in several southern cities. In 1957, a group of more than 60 civil rights activists met in Atlanta to discuss strategies for achieving goals through nonviolent disobedience. The activists formed the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and decided to use the influence of the black church, African American ministers and congregations, to spread its message and gain support. Early in the movement, the SCLC focused on education as well as voter registration. Some groups, including the Congress of Racial Equality and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, criticized the SCLC for not conducting more visible protests such as sit-ins and freedom rides. However, the SCLC had some notable successes in changing segregationist policies and bringing attention to the cause. For example, it coordinated 1963 marches in Birmingham, Alabama, in which protesters opposed discrimination by the city's downtown merchants, and perhaps most famously the March on Washington later that summer. Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Former SCLC official Ella Baker founded the Independent Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in 1960. The SNCC involved itself in several mainstream civil rights protests, including the 1961 Freedom Rides and the 1963 March on Washington, as well as in Freedom Summer and the abortive Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. Two of its best-known members were Field Secretary and later Chairman John Lewis and his successor as Chairman, Stokely Carmichael. Under the leadership of Carmichael and his eventual successor, H. Rap Brown, the SNCC became more militant, promoting the tenets of the Black Power philosophy. By the 1970s, SNCC had ceased to exist as a national organization. The Greensboro Sit-In. In 1960, 4 black students from North Carolina A&T University sat at a segregated lunch counter in a Greensboro F.W. Woolworth store. Management predictably denied them service. Rather than leaving, they sat patiently in their seats until closing time. The next day, several others joined the sit-in. After a few more days, hundreds had come to protest. The Woolworth's management stated their willingness to negotiate, but the students rejected their terms and resumed their protest. Authorities arrested 45 protesters and charged them with trespassing. The students involved in the sit-in expanded their protest to include even more businesses with discriminatory practices. Businesses that refused to serve blacks saw their profits drop by more than 30%, and they relented, eventually dropping their rules against serving black patrons. Though not the first instance of the sit-in as a form of protest, the Greensboro demonstration sparked a movement in more than 100 cities across the country. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee managed the sit-in protests, and their success helped to overturn business segregation laws in many cities. Also, many of these protesters were beaten at the lunch counters, but still did not fight back, and their efforts helped to galvanize this movement and helped to end the discrimination at these establishments. Freedom rides. In 1961, a Supreme Court ruling overturned segregated bus terminals. That year, SNCC organized a series of freedom rides in which about 400 people, mostly young white and black males, rode buses across the South to test different cities' implementation of the ruling. The riders met little hostility as they drove through Virginia and North Carolina. However, as they entered Rockville, South Carolina, angry whites attacked some of the riders, and police arrested one rider for using the bus terminal's restroom. In Anniston, Alabama, things became much worse. A crowd of whites disabled one of the buses outside of town by flattening its tires, and then firebombed the bus with the passengers still inside. As the passengers tried to escape the burning bus, the mob of more than 100 whites held the doors shut. Only when an undercover FBI agent pulled his gun did the mob allow the passengers to leave the bus. The mob attacked them as well. When the remaining bus made it into Anniston, another mob pulled off its passengers and beat them with pipes. In Birmingham, police arrested some riders for violating segregation laws. Riders at the Montgomery bus station faced another mob without the benefit of any police protection. They also were severely beaten. While Martin Luther King publicly supported the rides, he did not participate in them. Privately, he questioned their purpose. Because he did not fully support the riders, tensions escalated between King and more militant student civil rights activists. By the summer of 1961, Attorney General Robert Kennedy petitioned the Interstate Commerce Commission to issue an injunction forcing states to integrate bus terminals. The ICC issued the injunction in September, and the new rules went into effect in November 1961. James Meredith and Ole Miss. James Meredith, an African American, had already spent 9 years in the military, as well as 2 years studying at Jackson State College in Mississippi, but he wanted to attend the University of Mississippi to pursue a pre-law degree. Ole Miss, a segregated college, twice denied him admission. He then decided to sue the university. The university still denied Meredith admittance, even though he won his lawsuit. Riots broke out on campus when he went to attend classes, and since Governor Ross Barnett publicly opposed Meredith's entry, President John F. Kennedy had to call out federal troops and U.S. Marshals to maintain order and ensure that Meredith could get to class. 2 people died during the riots, with dozens of injuries to both military personnel and marshals. Barnett and the segregationists relented, admitting Meredith to the university. He graduated in 1963 with a degree in history and later got his law degree at Columbia University. While he participated in civil rights demonstrations and was wounded during a march from Memphis, Tennessee to Jackson, Mississippi, he later left the movement and ran several unsuccessful campaigns for a seat in the U.S. House of Representatives. Integrating the University of Alabama. While Meredith sought to integrate the University of Mississippi, James Hood and Vivian Malone sought to do the same at the University of Alabama. Governor George C. Wallace promised to stand in the schoolhouse door to stop them from entering the university, appointing himself as a special registrar at the school for just such a purpose. This image that you see on the slide is also a scene from the film Forrest Gump. Run, Forrest, run. Flanked by the federalized Alabama National Guard as well as Deputy Attorney General Nicholas Katzenbach, Hood and Malone tried to enter the school. Wallace eventually stepped aside, and the University of Alabama registered them as students. Malone graduated from the university 2 years later with a degree in business management and went on to work for the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Justice. Hood left the university after only 2 months, but went on to receive degrees in political science and police administration from Wayne State University, as well as the University of Michigan. He later returned to the University of Alabama in 1997 and earned a doctorate in philosophy. The Birmingham Campaign. In May 1963, hundreds of demonstrators, including many children and students, converged on the city of Birmingham, Alabama, in an attempt to stop segregation by downtown businesses. Called the most segregated city in America, Birmingham had earned the nickname Bombingham because of a rash of bombings of black homes in the city. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference staged a boycott of the offending businesses and began a campaign of sit-ins and marches. City officials had obtained a court injunction forbidding demonstrations by the SCLC, which elected to ignore the injunction and march in accordance with King's philosophy of nonviolent civil disobedience. The Birmingham Police and Fire Departments, led by local police commissioner Bull Connor, set upon the marches with billy clubs, police dogs, and fire hoses. Birmingham's business leaders, aware of the adverse publicity as well as the decline in their profits, decided to negotiate with the SCLC and pledged to eliminate segregation by local businesses. However, this enraged members of the local Ku Klux Klan, who bombed several homes in Birmingham in retaliation, including that of Martin Luther King's brother. In September 1963, they also bombed the 16th Street Baptist Church during Sunday school services, killing 4 young girls. The murder of Medgar Evers. Just hours after Kennedy announced the introduction of his Civil Rights Bill, Mississippi NAACP Field Secretary Medgar Evers was shot and killed outside his home in Jackson. The bullet that hit him ricocheted toward the house, hitting a wall and narrowly missing his wife and children. Evers had received death threats before. A few weeks earlier, someone threw a firebomb at his house. A few days before his murder, a car tried to run Evers down as he left the NAACP office. After his death, Evers was buried in Arlington National Cemetery. Authorities soon charged Byron De La Beckwith, a fertilizer salesman and known member of the White Citizens Council and Ku Klux Klan, with Evers' murder. He was tried twice for the crime in 1964. Both cases resulted in a hung jury. However, authorities reopened the investigation into Evers' death in the early 1990s after De La Beckwith publicly claimed at a Ku Klux Klan rally to have killed Evers. In his 1994 trial, a jury that included 8 African Americans found De La Beckwith guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment and died in 2001. This story is highlighted in the film Ghosts of Mississippi with Whoopi Goldberg, which shows her dedication to bringing De La Beckwith to justice even 30 years after her husband's murder.